We all think we know why we do the things we do, right? We have reasons for our beliefs, for our choices, for our actions. But what if the reasons we give aren't the real story? What if they're actually something else entirely? We're going to take a deep dive into this fascinating idea.
So, this all starts with a really tragic case of a man named Theodore Wafer. A young woman, Renisha McBride, probably looking for help after a car crash, ended up at his door late one night. Wafer, thinking his house was under attack, grabbed his shotgun, opened the door, and fired, killing her. At his trial, this was his explanation. This was his reason.
And this slide, it just perfectly captures the heart of the problem. You see, Wafer's reason, his fear for his life, it seemed totally adequate to him. It explained his actions from his point of view. But for the jury, it wasn't adequate at all. It failed to justify what he did, and he was found guilty of second-degree murder. This difference between explaining something for ourselves and justifying it to others, well, that's the crucial point we're going to explore.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with that tale of two reasons, then look at the common sense picture of how we think they work, and then we'll get into a pretty radical rethinking of their entire purpose. We'll look at the mind's blind spots with some amazing scientific evidence, and finally, we'll land on this new theory that reasons, they're really for social consumption.
Okay, first up, a tale of two reasons. Let's really nail down this difference. An explanation, that just has to feel adequate to the person doing the action. But a justification, that has to seem adequate to other people, to society. It's really the difference between an internal standard and a social one.
All right, now let's talk about the common sense picture, how we all experience reasons in our everyday lives. Thankfully, it's usually a lot less traumatic than a murder trial. We use these little reasons all the time in our social interactions.
Take this super simple example. When Ji-Yun gives a reason for turning down the milkshake, she's doing way more than just saying no. She's hinting that she appreciates the offer, and maybe under different circumstances she would have said yes. She's being considerate, and in these ordinary, everyday moments, giving reasons is how we show people what kind of consideration they can expect from us.
Now, to really get this, we need to define a couple of key terms. First, an objective reason. This is just a fact out there in the world that supports a conclusion. Simple as that. The fact that today is Friday is an objective reason to believe that tomorrow is Saturday. These facts themselves don't really have any causal power. They're just true propositions.
And then we have a psychological reason. Now, this is our mental version of that objective reason. This is what's rattling around in our brains and actually has a causal role in our lives. But, like any representation, it can be wrong. It can be a misrepresentation. We might be mistaken about the facts or about how they really support our conclusions.
Okay, so now we're going to challenge this whole picture. The common view, right, is that these psychological reasons are what motivate us, what guide our actions and our beliefs. But what if that's not their main job at all?
And here it is. This is the radical argument. The primary role of reasons isn't to guide us as we make a decision. No, it's to explain and justify our decisions to ourselves and others after we've already made them.
Let's unpack that a little. A lot of the time, we arrive at beliefs and decisions intuitively. You know that feeling when you just know your friend is upset, or when you pick which movie to see? It just kind of comes to you. Now, if someone asks, you can absolutely come up with reasons, but you weren't consciously thinking them through at the moment of decision. The reasons are produced later, mostly to justify ourselves in the eyes of other people.
Now, I know this might sound a little strange, but there is a ton of experimental evidence that suggests we have a massive blind spot when it comes to our own minds. In fact, all our mental processes, both cognitive and emotional, are now seen as largely or even completely unconscious.
Psychologists Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson argued that when we explain our own behavior, our verbal reports are often what they call confabulations. This basically means we construct plausible stories after the fact, rather than accessing a true memory of our mental process. We're essentially just guessing about our own motivations, almost the same way we might guess about somebody else's.
And this is just brilliantly shown by a classic experiment on the bystander effect. So a participant is in a room filling out a questionnaire, and all of a sudden they hear a loud crash and a woman screaming in pain from the next room. The huge question is, what are they going to do? And does it make a difference if they're alone or not?
The results are, well, they're absolutely staggering. When the participants were alone, 70% of them got up to help. But, and get this, when they were in the room with another person, a Confederate who was trained to just ignore the sounds, only 7% intervened. That is a tenfold decrease in the likelihood of helping. Just incredible. But here's the truly mind-blowing part. When the researchers asked the participants who didn't help if the other person's presence had any effect on their decision, most of them were adamant that it had no influence whatsoever. They were completely unaware of the one massive factor that had just driven their behavior.
So the reasons they did give, things like, it didn't sound that serious, or I figured someone else would help, those were not the true cause of their inaction. They were after-the-fact rationalizations. They were confabulations created to explain a decision that was actually driven by an intuitive social cue that they weren't even aware of.
And this brings us to our final section, and really the core idea of this whole explainer. Reasons are for social consumption.
So this is the central question, right? If we're not using reasons to make up our own minds, then what on earth is their actual function in our mental and social lives?
And the answer is surprisingly social. The main function of producing and giving reasons is to manage our reputation. We are social creatures through and through, constantly aware of how we're being seen by others, and reasons are a key tool in that whole process.
I mean, just look at all the jobs that reasons do for us socially. They justify our actions. They defend our reputation. They let us take responsibility, while also often denying guilt. They commit us to future behavior, and they help stabilize the social norms of our group. It's an incredibly powerful social toolkit.
This quote just sums it up perfectly. Reasons are social constructs. They're not some pure report of what's happening in our inner mental world. No, they're a simplified, distorted, and heavily normative story that we tell about ourselves for social purposes.
And what's really important to the people who are listening to our reasons isn't the historical accuracy of our introspection. No, what really matters is the commitment we're making. When we give a reason, we are expressing that we recognize its value and we are committing to being guided by similar reasons in the future. That's the social contract.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. The next time you find yourself explaining why you did something, just pause and ask yourself, are you reporting a genuine memory of a mental process, or are you, like all of us, constructing a justification, a story that is ultimately designed for social consumption? It's a fascinating question to think about.